Hey guys, NCWQ here, and if you can see, we have a new article today. It's why the Blanco fault zone earthquake is fun, not fearsome. This is coming from Scientific American, and we're going to read through this article here. I'm going to switch over so we can look at California, and it may spin and it may stop spinning. Anyways, a recent 6.3 earthquake off the Oregon coast triggered Cascadia concerns. Here's why seismologists don't share those particular fears. It's as certain as sunrise. The moment there's a sizable earthquake anywhere near the Cascadia subduction zone, nearly everyone starts wondering if it means the big one is next. The 6.3 earthquake that struck on the Blanco fault zone on Thursday, August 29th, was no different. Almost as soon as the mild shaking along the southern Oregon coast stopped, worried folks were asking if the Cascadia might rip. Worries will probably increase as aftershocks, some of them hefty like yesterday's 5.9, continue. The verdict of seismologists: there is no increased risk. If Cascadia does rupture soon, it won't be because this latest earthquake triggered it. The fault zones are connected to the same plate, but they're very different beasts. And no, despite the words placed in a professor's mouth by one eager reporter, the Cascadia subduction zone is most certainly not overdue for a megathrust earthquake. We'll get to that in a bit. Lots of people have written very serious words about this event, so I'm going to take a much breezier tone with this post. The BFZ is seriously awesome and a lot of fun to get to know. The Blanco fracture zone, seriously, not even close to Cascadia. The BFZ is a nice transformed fault zone that is a bit like the San Andreas, only underwater and much less dangerous to humans. It forms the boundary between the Juan de Fuca and the Pacific plates, and is around 200 kilometers west of the Cascadia subduction zone, where the Juan de Fuca dives under the North American plate. Let's fix this. This may not seem like a great distance on a global scale, but it's pretty darn far when it comes to a separation between fault zones. It would take a much bigger earthquake to have any effect on the faraway faults. All the effects of this earthquake, I am assured by Dr. Paul Bowden of the University of Washington, will be strictly local. That's good news for Cascadia, which won't be feeling any strain from this event. Earthquakes of this magnitude, poof, they happen all the time. As Dr. Jackie Kaplan Auerbach of Western Washington University said when discussing the earthquake in the Pacific Northwest Earthquake Discussion Group, business as usual on the Blanco, it really is. The Blanco isn't nearly as prone to large earthquakes as the San Andreas, but it still hosts some fairly hefty ones each year. In fact, there was an earthquake nearly identical to this one almost exactly a year ago. Cascadia stayed quiet through that one too. And in between medium-large events, the fault zone fairly hums with small earthquakes. It's got about 49 millimeter per year of motion to accommodate as the Juan de Fuca plate travels past the Pacific plate towards the North American plate. Some of that motion happens during large events, some during earthquakes of quite minor magnitude, and some probably happen quietly and continuously without causing detectable earthquakes at all. Why isn't the BFZ prone to San Andreas-style large damaging quakes? This is where it gets really neat, at least to me and hopefully to you. The Juan de Fuca plate is born at the Juan de Fuca Ridge. This ridge is a wee cousin of the massive mid-ocean ridges like Mid-Atlantic Ridge, which erupts lovely mid-ocean ridge basalts and creates fine new ocean floor. The plate is only about 442 kilometers wide from its birth to the ridge to its depth at the subduction zone. That means it's young and warm, much more pliant than old, cold continental crust that makes up the majority of the San Andreas. So it tends to break in much smaller events, sort of like a cookie that hasn't been long out of the oven, compared to the sudden and brittle crack of a cookie that's been sitting on the counter for several days. Some seismologists think the BFZ might possibly be capable of an M7 or maybe a bit bigger, but a catastrophic quake like an M8 is quite unlikely there. Also, seismic waves don't travel as readily through young, warm crusts as they do through old, cold crusts. So that's plus the considerable distance from population centers along the coast, means folks living along the Oregon and California coasts don't have to worry about the Blanco murdering them in their sleep. But it's underwater. Does that mean tsunamis are a possibility? Probably not. The BFZ's got the kind of transform faults that don't really lend themselves to creating tsunamis, and most of the quakes it produces aren't big enough to generate them anyway. It might produce the occasional wee tiny tsunami in exceptional circumstances, but it's pretty doubtful it'd do more than get your ankles extra wet at the beach. You're in more danger from poorly anchored shelves and such at home in case of a large earthquake it's likely to generate, and even that danger is quite negligible. You should probably go ahead and get anchoring anyway if you haven't already. The Pacific Northwest is absolutely riddled with faults that are much closer to population centers and hence likely to knock stuff over on you. So, like, if it isn't dangerous, why is it so exciting? It is an ocean transform fault that is close enough to civilization so as to be easy to study, which basically makes it the Mount St. Helens of the ocean transform faults. We can intensely study it without having to spend gigantic amounts of money on it just getting there and back again. The entire Juan de Fuca system, from mid ocean ridge to subduction zone, is a fantastically convenient plate tectonics lab, plunked down within easy reach of some of the finest universities in the country. Heck yeah, that's exciting. Okay, fine. Now let's talk about the Cascadia being overdue for a major earthquake. If you read the CBS article about the August 29th earthquake, you may have raised your eyebrows at this indirect quote. The quake was caused by slipping along an offshore fault called the Blanco fracture zone and has nothing to do with the more well known Cascadia fault, which is believed to be overdue for a major earthquake in the Pacific Northwest, said Paul Bowden, manager of the Pacific Northwest Seismic Network at the University of Washington. Note well the lack of quotation marks. It appears that the reporter slipped in an interpretation of his own while paraphrasing Dr. Bowden. When I reached out to Dr. Bowden for classification, he advised that it was not a direct quote. Okay, 1 second. My earth stopped turning. This, however, is like many seismologists, in quotation marks, the majority. I don't like the word overdue because I, in quotation, we, don't really buy the underlying concept. The Earth can be regular, but it's not abiding by human clocks and calendars. It doesn't have Cascadia rupture penciled in for precisely X number of years since the last one. And while we can infer the general frequency and patterns from the past events, we are working with pretty large plus or minus numbers. There's the average, and then there's the actual, and there's hundreds of years of wiggle room in there. That's an eye blinking geology, but entire generations in human time. When you know the fault ruptures every 500 years on average, but sometimes there's 300 years between events and sometimes 700, give or take many decades, talking about Cascadia being overdue only 320 years after the last major earthquake becomes meaningless. As Dr. Bowden said, we are entering an interval of time that geologists think has seen reoccurrences in the past. But they also wouldn't be surprised if we had to wait another 300 years based on their interpretation of our past earthquakes history. So, rumors of Cascadias being overdue have been greatly exaggerated. That doesn't mean we can stop worrying and start ignoring seismic building codes, though far from it. It's not like Cascadia couldn't produce a catastrophic earthquake right now, and even if it keeps snoozing for another few hundred years, the dizzying variety of faults under and around major population centers will absolutely, certainly make it worth our whiles to invest in earthquake resistant infrastructure. One thing's for sure, though, the Blanco fracture zone will remain more friend than foe for a very long time to come. That link is another example of people's desperately wanting to link the BFC to the Cascadia subduction zone, I read the paper this press release is talking about. The only mentions of the Cascadia are referring to the Cascadia Depression, which is a far, far different structure than the subduction zone. Anyways, you guys, this was written by Scientific America, Dana Hunter, and just thought I'd share it with y'all. Hope y'all are having a great day or night wherever you are in the world. Much love.